ever been asked a question so in such a horrible manner. First question. You don't even say, hello, how are you?
One of the things the president's been very focused on is trying to prevent escalation here.
We can't have 4 more years of Donald Trump, especially with J.D. Vance, one heartbeat away from the presidency.
Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington. Welcome to America Decides. Vice President Kamala Harris is speaking in Houston tonight as she sets a timeline to choose her running mate. A pick is expected to be made by Monday. But we're going to begin tonight with former President Donald Trump's startling comments at the National Association of Black Journalists conference in Chicago today. His appearance quickly turned hostile as he questioned Kamala Harris's racial identity, despite his stated desire to make inroads with black voters. We may hear more from him about it tonight. He's holding a rally in Harrisburg. You see him there. It's the former president's first visit to Pennsylvania since the assassination attempt in Butler. Our Robert Costa is there in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, covering tonight's Trump rally, and our Ed O'Keefe is in Houston covering Kamala Harris's event at an historically black sorority. Welcome to you both. So, Robert, let's start with that Q&A that former President Trump participated in at the National Association of Black Journalists conference today. He was asked if he agrees with Republicans who have demeaned VP Harris by calling her a DEI hire, and he said she, quote, could be a DEI hire, and he also said this. Take a listen.
I've known her a long time indirectly, not directly very much, and she was always of Indian heritage, and she was only promoting Indian heritage. I didn't know she was black until a number of years ago when she happened to turn black, and now she wants to be known as black. So I don't know, is she Indian or is she black?
So he said she turned black recently. You could hear people in the room gasping. Robert, is the Trump campaign attempting to do any cleanup tonight after all that?
Good to be with you, Nancy. I'm here in Pennsylvania, and former President Trump will be here soon, but it is his remarks in Chicago earlier today that have been seen widely across the political spectrum as incendiary. Instead of avoiding the topics of race and gender, former President Trump decided to go right at the issue of race. Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, went to a historically black college, Howard University, has long talked in positive and obviously personal terms about her family's journey in this country, her parents, academics and activists, and she has embraced her history, her lineage. And you see former President Trump, instead of talking about the issues, talking about race, and it is something that has set the political world afire tonight. But among many Trump supporters here, there's a relative shrug. This is the Trump they know. This is the Trump they have come to embrace politically. And among the Trump voters I've spoken with here, there's no concern at all about those comments in Chicago.
Right. I mean, this is the Trump who made his way onto the political stage by questioning whether Barack Obama was born in this country. Ed, the White House press secretary, Karine Jean-Pierre, was told about Trump's comments in real time in the White House briefing today. And take a look at what she said in response.
As a person of color, as a black woman who is in this position that is standing before you at this podium behind this lectern, what he just said, what you just read out to me, is repulsive, it's insulting, and, you know, no one has any right to tell someone who they are, how they identify. That is no one's right. It is someone's own decisions.
So that's the White House. And how is the Harris campaign reacting to what the former president said about her today?
Well, Nancy, the vice president is headed here to Houston tonight, as you said, to speak to a national sorority here at the convention center in Houston. We are likely to hear more from her once she arrives. But for now, the campaign in a statement has said that the hostility Donald Trump showed on stage today is the same hostility he's shown throughout his life, throughout his term in office, and throughout his campaign for president as he seeks to regain power and inflict his harmful Project 2025 agenda on the American people. They add that he lobbed personal attacks and insults at black journalists the same way he did throughout his presidency, while he failed black families and left the entire country digging out of the ditch he left us in. Donald Trump has already proven he cannot unite America, so he attempts to divide us. That from a campaign spokesman. They're not only seizing on what he said about the vice president's own identity, but also the way he responded to questions from some of our colleagues in the press who happen to be black and who were among those questioning him at the NABJ conference. We should point out these are annual conferences, and every 4 years the associations of Asian, Hispanic, black, and gay journalists, as they hold their summer conferences, invite the presidential candidates to come speak. Trump accepted the invitation, in part because he's been making an appeal to black voters, especially in battleground states. But we'll see how those voters and others across the country react to what he had to say today in the coming days.
Right. He repeatedly went after Rachel Scott of ABC, saying that she was nasty and hostile, simply, it appears, for asking him about comments that he himself has made in the past. Robert, Trump was also asked about his choice for vice president, Senator J.D. Vance. And interestingly, Trump said that historically the choice of a VP doesn't have any impact on the outcome, really downplaying the importance of his own pick there. But North Carolina Senator Kevin Cramer told CBS News today that a high-up important person, he didn't say who, but someone high up, ostensibly with the campaign, told him that Trump should have picked someone else. In fact, should have picked Doug Burgum, the governor of North Dakota. What are you hearing from the campaign about the J.D. Vance choice?
I'm told from several people close to the campaign that former President Trump has never thought about the vice presidential selection, be it in 2016 or 2024, as a serious part of the presidential campaign. He believes the campaign's about him versus the Democratic nominee, and the running mate is interesting for a few days, but never something that he believes will hold the interest of him or voters. So you see him giving a concession, in a sense, to his base by picking Senator Vance, who's a favorite of the conservative commentator Tucker Carlson, a favorite of his son, Donald Trump Jr., and someone who is liked by his campaign staff because of the possibility of maybe adding some support in the industrial Midwest. At the same time, it's not something that is a fixation for former President Trump. I'm not hearing any talk that he is going to dump Senator Vance from the ticket, but he did like North Dakota Governor Doug Burgum a lot. Talked in private, I'm told, for many months how he believed Burgum came from central casting, had the right look, the right positions. But ultimately, he went with Senator Vance, 39 years old. Is there regret? I don't hear that directly from people close to Trump. At the same time, I hear he's shrugging off the criticism of Vance. He believes that at the end of the day, the campaign's about Trump.
Right. Definitely defending him today, saying that he just really loves family, saying that in response to some of J.D. Vance's past comments, criticizing people who are childless. Ed, you are in Houston to cover Vice President Harris's appearance there. This is her second time in Houston in the past week. Is there a strategy to her spending so much time in a red state like Texas, or is this just happenstance?
It is happenstance, Nancy. In fact, it's her third visit to the Lone Star State in the last month. Last week, it was for a previously scheduled appearance at another sororities conference here in Houston, and then she tacked on a visit to an emergency operations center still dealing with recent flooding here. This time it's because tomorrow is the funeral for the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, a longtime friend of the vice president, a fellow sister in the Alpha Kappa Alpha sorority, and she wanted to be able to be here for the funeral, which is tomorrow morning. Tonight, they added a campaign fundraiser a few blocks from where we are, and then an appearance at another sororities biennial conference here in Houston. Convenient timing, perhaps, but it's not part of some attempt to win Texas. It's still widely understood among Democrats that that is very much a reach and not something that's likely to happen this year. That said, coming here to Harris County, populated part of the state, just about the third largest city in the country, if you take this metropolitan area as a whole, doesn't hurt to have her here, running up the vote potentially come the fall for making so many appearances and potentially keeping the margins in Texas at least closer. But other than that, it's merely coincidence. And the president also was here in Houston on Monday to pay respects to Congresswoman Jackson Lee. So all of it mostly designed for that.
Robert, Trump tonight is making this appearance in Pennsylvania for the first time since the assassination attempt against him in Butler, Pennsylvania. What's the security like there in Harrisburg at the event?
It's It's guarded by Secret Service. Everyone went through magnetometers coming in here, were waved down. So it's tight security. It doesn't feel like it's an unusual amount of security for the former president. A lot of Secret Service at every one of his events. It's hard to get into an event. There's a lot of police presence in the surrounding neighborhoods and roads. Certainly heavy security, but as a reporter, I've been to many Trump rallies, and it doesn't strike me as anything out of the ordinary. What is notable is a lot of the President Trump behind me on stage have been referencing an assassination attempt. President Trump putting his fist in the air, surviving the assassination attempt. So there's rallying around of Trump by his core supporters. Also an appearance by Senate candidate McCormick, trying to add a Senate seat for the GOP. He's running against Bob Casey, the incumbent Democrat.
And it's an indoor event, which is always easier for the Secret Service to secure. Robert Costa in Pennsylvania, Ed O'Keefe in Texas, thanks so much to you both. Iran's supreme leader vows revenge against Israel after a deadly airstrike in Tehran. The growing concerns over an all-out regional war and what the U.S. is saying about the unrest. You're streaming America Decides. We are following several developments in the Middle East where Israeli strikes have killed a Hamas political leader and a Hezbollah commander. Our Imtiaz Tayyab is in Beirut. Imtiaz, what can you tell us?
Well, Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas reacting with fury following those two assassinations. Here in Lebanon, we've seen the first funerals of those who also died in that Israeli airstrike carried out by Israeli fighter jets. Hamas, or rather Hezbollah, not confirming that Israel's target, Fuad Shukr, has been killed, although Israel and the U.S. are confirming that he was indeed killed in that strike. But really, it is the killing or assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Iran, which is causing the most concern. Not only for Iran, which has really been exposed in a way that it's completely shocked it as a country, given the fact that Israel was able to go into Iranian territory and carry out this assassination while Haniyeh was there to take part in the inauguration of the new president. But it also speaks to a bigger issue. Ismail Haniyeh was leading negotiations for a ceasefire and hostage release deal, indirectly negotiating with Israel. And with him now dead, again, killed by Israel, although Israel has been silent on it, but Hamas and indeed Iran saying that Israel was behind it, this really calls into question whether or not a ceasefire deal or a hostage release deal can be achieved, given the fact that he's now been killed. And many feel that these negotiations are now hanging by a thread. Nancy.
Imtiaz Tayyab, thank you so much. Willie James Inman joins us now from the White House. Willie, thanks for being with us. At the White House briefing today, National Security Communications Advisor John Kirby spoke about the risk of war spreading in the Middle East. Take a listen, then I want to ask you about it.
We don't believe that an escalation is inevitable, and there's no signs that an escalation is imminent. But I also said that we watch it very, very closely. I also said and said again today that this is something that we've been concerned about since the 7th of October.
Willie, how much concern is there within the White House about these latest strikes?
Hey there, Nancy. Well, good to be with you, and we apologize for the rain here. I'm just going to continue and talk through it. But the White House seems to be concerned, but at the same time downplaying these strikes, essentially saying that a widespread conflict and escalation is not inevitable, as John Kirby said just there. You also have Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. He said as much earlier today while traveling with his press corps. He was asked about this situation as well. And I can tell you, White House officials are trying to make sure that a wider spread conflict doesn't happen. You have Secretary of State Antony Blinken working the phones, trying to make sure that he has everybody in line, working on that ceasefire and that hostage negotiation deal. That's the focus for this White House, Nancy. They're trying to make sure that everyone stays the line and doesn't escalate things any further.
Right. And in fact, Secretary Blinken was asked about the killing of the Hamas leader earlier today. Let's take a listen to what he said.
I've seen the reports, and all I can tell you right now is I think nothing takes away from the importance of, as I said a moment ago, getting to the ceasefire.
So the ceasefire is the priority, but where do ceasefire talks stand after these strikes?
Well, we know, according to White House officials, that this is still ongoing. It's still an ongoing conversation. In fact, Kirby just mentioned at the press briefing a little bit ago, he said that people are in the region, that you have a U.S. delegation in the region working on this hostage negotiation deal. But I'll point out, though, Nancy, one of the chief negotiators, or mediators, I should say, is the Prime Minister of Qatar, Al Thani, who said essentially on social media, he said, how can mediation succeed when one party assassinates the negotiator on the other side? That coming from the Qataris in note of this situation that we have seen play out in the Middle East.
Yeah, that's not a great sign. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said today, though, quote, "We will settle our scores with anyone who harms us." Does the White House agree with that approach?
Yeah, these comments came out just hours ago, and I reached out to White House officials to get their response in terms of what they had to say. No word yet on a response to the Prime Minister's comments, but I'll point out, oftentimes you have Prime Minister Netanyahu, he will come out and say something that the White House doesn't necessarily agree with. And let's point out, of course, that the White House is working on de-escalating things. These comments from Prime Minister Netanyahu certainly may not appear to do just that. But White House officials and officials within the Biden administration say that they are working to de-escalate the situation, to cool the temperature, so to speak. But these comments probably don't add to that cooling of the temperature, as they've been trying to say that they're doing. Nancy?
No question. Willie James Inman, who looks like he is braving a ferocious rainstorm there today at the White House. Thanks so much.
You bet.
Will voters get to see Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump on the debate stage together? Our political panel will weigh in on that next. You're streaming America Decides. Donald Trump says he will probably debate Kamala Harris, but the vice president is taunting him over his refusal to commit to the previously agreed upon date of September 10th.
I do hope you'll reconsider to meet me on the debate stage. Because as the saying goes, if you got something to say,
let's bring in our political panel, Megan Hayes and Maura Gillespie. Megan served as special assistant to President Biden and White House director of message planning. Maura is a Republican strategist who served as an advisor to former Speaker John Boehner and Congressman Adam Kinzinger. Welcome to you both. Maura, I'll start with you. Former President Trump appears to be leaving his options open. Why is he taking that approach, and what do you think he'll end up doing at the end of the day?
He's going to have to debate her, and I know that's probably not what the Trump campaign wants to commit to right now, but because they need to get their strategy in place right now. Unfortunately, it's all over. They really had an opportunity to streamline their messaging to focus on policy issues that they have with the Kamala Harris ticket, but they have unfortunately decided to go the route of personal attacks. And so they need to clean that up before they even entertain the idea of having a debate. But a debate is important for the American people to truly assess this shakeup and what the election will be. We're only 4 months out, and it's important that people hear from the two people who are running for the top spot.
Yeah, I mean, Megan, Maura's right. The fact that he is wavering on this debate and his campaign is wavering on a vice presidential debate as well kind of gives Kamala Harris a big opening to call him a scaredy cat.
Yes and no. I mean, I think that just like Maura was saying, they're trying to figure out what their messaging is. He's throwing everything at the wall. Nothing seems to be sticking. But I do think, just to Maura's point, it is important for people to see Kamala Harris is a different candidate than Joe Biden. Her vision is going to be different for the next 4 years. It won't be vastly different, but it's important for these independent voters to really see the contrast between the two people. So I think that at the end of the day, they'll agree to it.
I imagine you saw at least part of Trump's appearance at the National Association of Black Journalists conference in Chicago. It was really Striking. For some reason, he decided to question Kamala Harris's racial identity. He said that she just started calling herself black, even though this is someone who went to a historically black college when she was in her early 20s. She has always described herself as black and of Indian descent. What do you make of that appearance? Do you think it changes anything, particularly when it comes to black voters?
I think he's throwing everything at the wall. I think he's trying to see what sticks. This is coming off the heels of calling her husband a bad Jew yesterday. So this is just, he's making personal attacks. I don't think he knows what's going to stick in a policy perspective from him. I think he's trying to shore up his base because he knows that these independent voters are going to be much more difficult to get now that Joe Biden's age isn't the main topic of conversation. So I think that he is just trying to shore up his base. And I think that that's what his base wants him to hear, is this incendiary, like, divisive comments. So, I mean, it's disgusting and vulgar, but it's not surprising. This is the Donald Trump that we saw in 16 and in 20. He goes after the personal before the policy.
Maura, do you think that, this is a former president who doesn't take questions, frankly, from mainstream outlets very much anymore? He tends to go to some of his chosen right-wing outlets. Do you think he just got rattled by the kinds of questions he was getting asked and retreated to a message that's profoundly unhelpful when you're speaking to black journalists?
Trump tends to go on autopilot when he is flustered and or feels like he's lost track of what he was supposed to be saying in the first place. And we see that by he makes these similar comments he's always made. He does make inflammatory remarks and criticisms and just derogatory comments towards women especially. And I don't see how this plays well, given I'm getting floods of text messages today about Democrats, the progressives are out to take away Kamala Harris, the most anti-Catholic candidate ever to run for president, and things of that nature. And then on the flip side, you're espousing and derogatory comments that don't really fall in line with the Christian values that you're purporting to represent. I think that there is a real disconnect at the Trump campaign. They cannot, one, control the messenger, but don't have a sense of what the message should be. This is not helpful, especially as Megan and you have talked about the independent voters, the people who he needs to get on board. There's a small sliver of voters who both candidates really need to try and win over, because both so far have not done so. The Biden-Harris campaign administration and the Trump campaign have isolated this more moderate pool of voters.
I want to ask you both about Veep stakes, because it does appear that Vice President Harris is nearing a decision about who her running mate will be. Maura, of the 5 individuals who we have named as the top tier that she's now choosing from, Tim Walz of Minnesota, Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, Mark Kelly, the senator from Arizona, Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania. Who do you think is the candidate that Republicans would least like to see on that ticket? Who are they most afraid of?
I would think Mark Kelly, because it could get that pool of voters that I was talking about, those moderates who are not, keen to vote for Donald Trump in any capacity, or his mini-me, J.D. Vance. But on the same token, they have not been impressed by the Biden-Harris administration. So somebody like a Mark Kelly could really bring in some of those moderate voters who, care about security and safety with his law enforcement family background. Arizona could potentially be a playable state for the Harris campaign with Mark Kelly on the ticket. I think, his service to our country as a NASA astronaut. There's a lot of things there that I think would be smart for Kamala Harris to look at, and would be a real problem for Republicans to pull some of these voters who are, the Nikki Haley voters, or people who just are not okay with the inflammatory comments towards women, especially.
What do you think? Do you agree with Maura that Mark Kelly is most advantageous for Kamala Harris when it comes to reaching out to moderate voters?
Yeah, I think all of them fit different criteria that would be helpful to the campaign. I think that the Trump campaign is probably scared of all of them because, again, they don't know where the message is going to land with the now candidate. So I just think, they're still trying to figure things out. So just adding another person to the mix is just going to make them even more chaotic and more chaos. And I think the most important thing here is to name a vice president that's not going to own a negative news cycle like his pick is doing. So I think anyone she picks will be a step above that. So I think that she'll be in good shape there.
I was really struck by the schedule for next week. The Harris campaign made it known that the vice president is going to travel all over the country, basically for the entire work week, with her pick when she announces, most likely him, but him or her, starting in Philadelphia, which definitely made everyone go, oh, Philadelphia. I know someone who's from Philadelphia. It's Josh Shapiro. But you don't usually see that. You don't usually see a presidential and vice presidential nominee travel together like that to so many events. Typically, they tend to divide and conquer.
Yeah, normally you do 1 or 2 events together, but I do think that she's going to take this opportunity to reintroduce herself to the American people and to these independent voters in these battleground states. I think that's incredibly important. She's no longer running as the second to Joe Biden, who everyone knew and had an opinion about. So I do think it's important to introduce them together. People are voting for them together. People also, I think, the VP pick is becoming more important for people. As you know, you saw with Joe Biden's age, the Kamala Harris pick was extremely important. So I just think it's a good opportunity to reintroduce herself and reintroduce the country to the Democratic Party and the future of the Democratic Party. So I think it's incredible to get back into a normal campaign cycle with all these events and enthusiasm. I think it will be great for the party and great for their ticket.
Yeah. Maura, on the Republican side, President Trump has been asked repeatedly now about his pick, J.D. Vance. He said today, well, vice presidential nominees don't ever make a difference anyway, so it doesn't really matter. What are you hearing from others in the party about this choice?
Well, the reality is this does matter a lot. And I know we haven't given much focus to vice presidential picks in the past, but when it comes to, especially the Republican Party, right now, I don't think that J.D. Vance was chosen because of anything other than the fact that Trump really thought he had this in the bag. The unfortunate part for the Republican Party is looking forward, Trump can only serve, should he win, for 4 years. So J.D. Vance then becomes the top of the ticket, essentially, or would be, and his lack of fundraising ability thus far he's only been in the Senate for a short while. He doesn't have a strong history of fundraising for his fellow senators in the GOP or House members. So it's going to be really hard for the Republican Party to then look at J.D. Vance as the future of the party. I'm a Republican, and I don't see how that's possible at this stage because some of his views are just so far away from what the Republicans in Congress and the conference are looking to achieve, and the distractions that are happening long-term could be a real problem for us as a party.
Yeah, and he has had several opportunities to moderate some of those views. He's been asked about them several times, and he has declined to really do so. Megan Hayes and Maura Gillespie, thanks to both of you for coming in. Kadia Goba was on the panel interviewing the former president at the National Association of Black Journalists Convention in Chicago today. She's going to join us next to talk about it. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Donald Trump sat down to speak with reporters at the National Association of Black Journalists Conference in Chicago today. And during the first question, when the former president was pressed on his rhetoric, he lashed out at the reporter asking the question. Take a listen.
I think it's a very nasty question. I have answered the question. I have been the best president for the black population since Abraham Lincoln. That's my answer.
Better than President Johnson, who signed the Voting Rights Act.
And for you to start off a question and answer period, especially when you're 35 minutes late because you couldn't get your equipment to work in such a hostile manner, I think it's a disgrace.
Politics reporter for Semaphore, Kadia Goba, was one of the 3 moderators who spoke to President Trump, and she joins us now. Kadia, I know it's been a very busy and very interesting day, so I appreciate you joining us. And now that you've had a couple of hours to process what happened on that stage, what are your reflections about the things that Trump said, particularly his untrue claims about Kamala Harris's race and her heritage?
I haven't processed much of it because there's, like you said, there's still a lot going on. But I will say that that was very unexpected. And I feel like, possibly he made news for things that aren't true. I was surprised about that. It made me think that this is a new stump for him going forward. That's very unclear. I guess we'll see in any upcoming rallies or possibly debates. But it was very surprising to hear some of these newfound untruths or lies, I guess.
Yeah. You questioned Trump on the Republican Party and abortion. Let's hear a little bit of that exchange.
Do you think the Republican Party is getting a little bit too judgy about people's lives when you think about abortion or when you think about what J.D. Vance is saying?
I don't think, look, I think that the Democrat Party is really the one that has the problem. I think they're radical on abortion because they're allowing abortion in the 9th month.
So he went on to make some untrue statements there as well. He claimed that that Democrats wanted to allow people to commit after-birth abortions, which is not legal in any state. What did you make of his response?
Again, Donald Trump is very difficult to interview, and you have to be very pointed with your questions. And he didn't respond to that because what I was getting at is the Republican Party as a whole. Do you think that is, that they're making people, turning people off because they're judging him, judging Americans, whether it's me as a person who doesn't have children or him as a divorced man? And he just kind of didn't respond to the question, nor did he really respond when I asked him about giving cops immunity.
Yeah, it was very chaotic up there on that stage. It appeared that his team pulled him early from the full 60-minute panel. I want to ask you specifically, though, about the way that he spoke to Rachel Scott of ABC. She asked him a very tough question right off the top, but it was completely factual. It was about some of the racially insensitive claims that he himself has made in the past. She was just reading back to him things that he has said, and yet he told her it was a nasty, hostile question. He called her entire network fake news, and he kept going back after her again and again throughout your entire Q&A. What did you think of that behavior, and what were the other NABJ members saying about it afterwards?
Well, obviously, no reporter wants to hear, a person they're interviewing respond like that. So, as you can imagine, all of us we're taken aback by that because it was basically an affront on Rachel, but the other two panelists, including myself up there, especially the attacks on the sound system not working properly, just like it just kind of took away from the purpose of this. And that was to ask a former president who is now running for the seat, the Republican presidential nominee, what he thinks about certain issues. And it just, I feel like that was sidelined. Issues were sidelined by some of the chaos that, in particular, he started.
Right. It took away from some of the substantive policy discussion. You also pressed him on his age. Let's take a listen to that exchange.
If you win, you'll still be president at 82, which is older than Biden is right now.
But not mentally. Look, mentally.
Here's the question.
He's shot. But most people.
Would you consider?
Most people. I know many people in their 80s and their 90s that are in great shape. Some of our greatest leaders.
Would you consider stepping down if you felt that your health was declining? Or would you?
Oh, absolutely.
And who would?
I think I'd know.
How would you make that decision?
I think I'd know.
But would you consider taking the cognitive test?
Mr. President.
I would love to
and
do
make
it.
it public.
Well, I've already taken 2 of them, but I'll do it again.
We don't have a lot of time left, but why did you think it was important to ask him about that topic?
I mean, it is the most, obvious issue at hand. The Democratic nominee has changed because a lot of people took issue with where Joe Biden is right now. So, Trump is not that much younger, and I thought it was an important thing to get him on the record for.
Well, Khadija Goba, I salute you for persevering under very challenging conditions today on that stage. Thanks so much for coming on to talk to us. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Democrats are showing Kamala Harris the money. Up next, more on the vice president's historic fundraising haul. You're streaming America Decides. We'll be right back. Welcome back to America Decides. Former Vice President Kamala Harris is raking in a mountain of cash for her White House bid. Her campaign says it raised $200 million in its first week alone. 66% of that comes from first-time donors. But high-profile Democrats in Hollywood and Silicon Valley are also opening their wallets. Political reporter for the New York Times, Teddy Schleifer, has been following the money and joins us now. Hey, Teddy, it's great to see you. You've been reporting about a group of venture capitalists supporting the vice president called VCs for Kamala. How big is this group, and how are they going about this fundraising, at a slapdash pace, because they've only got a short amount of time here?
Sure. I don't think any of the names that have signed this public letter are going to surprise followers of politics. These are longtime Democrats supporting a Democratic presidential candidate. I think what's interesting, and this is a meta point, Nancy, is about the narrative. The narrative has taken hold in Silicon Valley. These are a bunch of, conservative Republicans. Obviously, we've seen people like Elon Musk, become much more conservative over the last couple of years, and they've kind of driven the conversation. And now we see an effort by sort of not pedestrian people, but typical Democrats in Silicon Valley who are trying to reclaim the narrative that tech is actually a liberal place. And for the first time, we're seeing a spirited debate amongst tech executives about presidential politics, which we didn't see at all during the Trump era, when it was kind of forbidden to be a vocal Trump supporter.
There has been some reporting that financial firms are being told, hey, if you want to give to the Harris campaign, you better do it right away, because there are some SEC rules that prevent certain types of financial firms and employees from giving to a campaign once a sitting governor is on the ticket. And that is something that could happen very soon if Josh Shapiro or Andy Beshear or Tim Walz join the ticket. What are you hearing about that?
Sure. So this is actually a pretty common thing at the intersection of technology and campaign politics, where I'll spare you all the details, but essentially, if you are a venture capitalist who has government funding, if you're investing on behalf of a fund that could be a state government pension fund or even some unions, it is difficult to then make a contribution to a person who is running for public office. So, look, I don't think anyone, even at the donor level, really knows exactly what Kamala Harris is going to do or who exactly she's going to choose. But this expectation that, it could be a governor means you want to donate ASAP. While if someone like Mark Kelly were chosen, there would be no possible legal issues with donating next week or in 2 weeks from now. But look, I think a lot of this is buzz and rumor and hoopla. Most major donors are out of the loop, just as anybody is.
Yeah, we've got about a minute left, but you've also been reporting about a new super PAC supported by allies of J.D. Vance. What are they hoping to accomplish?
Sure. So there is it's pretty interesting. There are a bunch of super PACs this cycle that are taking advantage of a recent rule change that allows them to coordinate directly with the campaign. Now, for people who follow politics in the past, you may assume that campaigns can't coordinate with super PACs, and they still can't on advertising. But on field programs, AKA people knocking on your door saying vote for Trump, you now can coordinate. So what we're seeing now are a bunch of super PACs getting started, including one started by allies of J.D. Vance, that are trying to coordinate with the Trump campaign on field. And we got a memo here at the Times that reveals, a $45 million push to start a new group called Turnout for America, which the Trump campaign is planning on coordinating with through November.
And we know he's got some pretty deep-pocketed allies in Silicon Valley, most notably Peter Thiel. Teddy Schleifer of the New York Times, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
You bet.
Governor Tim Walz takes aim at what he calls weird Republicans on the presidential ticket. We're going to take a closer look at the potential VP pick next on America Decides.
we do not like what has happened where we can't even go to Thanksgiving dinner with our uncle because you end up in some weird fight that is unnecessary. and I think bringing back people together, well, it's true. These guys are just weird.
Just weird. That was Minnesota Governor Tim Walz last week laying out a new line of criticism against the Republican ticket that has since become one of the most prominent messages of the Democratic Party, that the GOP is just weird. Sources tell CBS News that Walz is one of 5 Democrats who have emerged as the top contenders to become Kamala Harris's running mate. Harris is expected to announce her pick for VP by Monday. So our Katrina Kaufman is in St. Paul, Minnesota, covering the potential candidacy of Governor Walz. Katrina, great to see you. Talk to us more about the origins of this weird comment and Walz's overall strategy as a surrogate for Kamala Harris, because he has really emerged as one of the top surrogates, which is something I'm not sure most people saw coming.
Yeah, I think this has been a surprise to a lot of people. And this weird terminology is something that he's been saying for a little while now, but he has just gained prominence with it. And as you said, the Democratic Party is picking it up. Kamala Harris is picking it up. And he says that what he means by this is that he's not trying to stoop to playground name calling. It's just that he finds the policies, the rhetoric, the things that Trump and Vance are talking about on the campaign trail just weird. And he says that it's that way for the voters that he represents. Walz provides a really interesting counterpoint to Harris. He is from a rural area, working class. He was a former school teacher. He was a football coach. And he really provides a distinction from the characterization of her as sort of this left coast liberal prosecutor. So he could be a very interesting complement for her on this ticket.
He really could. And, you know, some of the other top contenders for VP were better known than Governor Walz. You had Pete Buttigieg, Josh Shapiro, but he does have some key assets beyond his ability to communicate that some of these other top contenders don't necessarily have. What are they?
Absolutely. He has risen to prominence here in Minnesota. He is known for having an extremely productive legislative record, and he really appeals to people as an everyman. He is someone that the party sees as potentially bringing over more of a moderate, working class, rural vote that could really provide a counterpoint to J.D. Vance.
Katrina, what would some of the drawbacks of picking Walz as a running mate be, you know, when you're talking about him vis-a-vis some of the other contenders?
For one, he doesn't have the same name recognition as some of these contenders. He also comes from a state that has typically voted Democratic. The last time that Minnesota voted for a Republican was back in 1972 for Nixon. But there have been a number of close races here, and Trump and Vance are absolutely making a play for Minnesota. They recently held a rally here. Another thing is that he received a lot of criticism for the handling of the riots after George Floyd. There was a lot of destruction that happened here in Minneapolis, and people feel as though he didn't bring in the National Guard soon enough. So similarly to the way that Trump has criticized Harris for being soft on crime, that could be a potential vulnerability for him as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. You know, we're hearing that Harris is going to unveil her running mate now by Monday at the latest. Any sense of how we can expect her to make this announcement?
We really don't know, but it's possible that she will follow suit with how Trump and Biden have been announcing things. Biden, when he decided to step out of the race, posted on X. Trump announced Vance as a running mate on social media, so perhaps this is a way that she'll go. What we do know is that she is going to hit the ground running with this VP pick. Starting on Tuesday in Pennsylvania, she has a battleground state tour set up.
Yeah, she's got 7 states that she's hitting with her VP pick in 1 week. So they're going to be spending a lot of time getting to know each other even better. Katrina Kaufman in Minnesota, thank you so much. And that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now. Have a good one.